and welcome to The Beam, where curiosity stirs conversations, taking us a step further into the future we desire. Here we bring you the issues that matter, the voices that challenge, and the insights that inspire. I am Sunes Nathaniel, and today we turn our attention to the fourth lines of national security, the tension between faith and fear, between state power and citizen trust. From the politics of religion down to the technologies of war, we are asking, what does security mean in a nation where faith is a target and trust is running thin? Stay with us. This will be a sobering but very necessary conversation. We'll be right back.
Welcome, dear Vice Chair.
It's an impressive gathering of UNESCO member states and other delegates at this side event of the ongoing 43rd UNESCO General Conference in Samarkand, Uzbekistan.
From climate change, disinformation.
Pertinent on the agenda of the meeting is Nigeria's bid to host UNESCO's first Category 2 International Media and Information Literacy Institute.
Nigeria affirms its strong dedication to...
After hours of deliberations, the approval was granted unopposed by member states.
It is proposed that we approve the designation of International Media and Information Literacy Institute in Abuja as an institute under the auspices of UNESCO Category 2, as recommended by the Executive Board in 222X Decision 19.9. Are there any comments? I see no comments, objections, so we approve this paragraph.
The Ministry of Information and National Orientation, which has been at the forefront of this milestone, says the approval signals a strong vote of confidence on Nigeria, crowning a long and dedicated journey that began in October 2022.
The decision to grant Nigeria the hosting rights for the world's first Category 2 UNESCO Media and Information Literacy Institute is not just an honor, but a strong vote of confidence in our nation. We accept this responsibility with a deep sense of purpose and a commitment to global leadership in this important area. The designation of IMILI as a Category 2 center comes at a pivotal moment, not just for Nigeria, but for the global community and Africa in particular.
Outside the hall, some members of the Nigerian delegation hailed the global approval, saying the center will be a valuable resource in promoting critical thinking and media professionalism.
The proposal came from Nigeria. It wasn't just borrowed from the UNESCO. And the idea was sold to the world, and they bought it. That means Nigerians have good brains to have brought out this good idea. And to say, for the first time, let's begin to hear good news from Nigeria.
This is an institute that's supposed to operate independently. There should be no interference whatever, which means the organizational structure should be on its own, the funding, and of course the budgeting, and in fact the programming, the activities, all has to be independent.
With this approval, Nigeria hopes to take a leading role in tackling misinformation and building a digital-informed society. Now, the coming months will be very crucial as the federal government works to meet the final requirements of UNESCO in bringing this global media literacy hub, expected to be launched in February 2026, to life. From the venue of the 43rd UNESCO General Conference here in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, Victoria Longjian, Channels Television News.
Welcome back. My guest is Professor Freedom Onoha, Coordinator for the Security, Violence and Conflict XVC Research Group, University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Professor, you're welcome. It's always a pleasure to have you on my program.
Thank you, Nathaniel, and nice to see you after a very long time.
Yes. Let's get right into it. There's so much going on when it comes to the space, where it comes to security, violence, conflict, politics, which is where you play a major role. So let's begin from the recent one, which has been very key, which is the security issue, where Trump is threatening to say, hey, I'm coming down to save these people in Nigeria. Let's begin from that, because my question would be, how much does this kind of statement touch to a very deep and dangerous narrative about the nation, one that can fool religious divides and shift international perception as regards the nation. So what do we do to make this, something different and change it for the better for this nation, basically?
Well, fundamentally, we need to understand the dynamics of domestic and international politics. Countries have vested interest, and in the context of Nigeria, I'm sure you know that the U.S. have a very strong strategic interest in Nigeria as a very strong partner. And in recent times also, we have then seen a bit of the shifting of the pendulum in terms of Nigeria's posture in bilateral and multilateral relationship, moving a bit also to having embrace with China and also having embrace with Russia. So you all heard about Trump, threatening to invoke military tools, or more or less a military intervention using the military to citizens, particularly Christians in Nigeria, controversy at the national and the international level. Let's look at both domestic and international. Again, that is getting a whole lot of future. Even though we have tended to see the Nigerian government, trying to take that kind of foreign policy posture that tries to guarantee, at least to confirm to the international community, that the Nigerian government is doing all that it can to protect all citizens, irrespective of faith, religion, or ethnic leaning. But there is always that major concern if you talk to some local people, depending on where and who you are talking to. If you talk to people that are from the Middle Belt, for example, there is always that sentiment that is also attached, or more or less swing towards the direction of the position of Donald Trump, who then feel that most times the majority of those being targeted are Christians, and therefore is within the remit of the United States, adjudged moral policing capability and disposition to leverage its International Religious Freedom Act to make such a pronouncement. But overall, again, we also need to understand that in itself is also creating a whole lot of tension at the international level. For example, where China and Russia has also tried to make an official position in that, to really against any country actually taking such a military and unilateral action in Nigeria, supposedly to protect Christians. But I think that assertion and the threat by Trump is already creating a whole lot of fissure, within the Nigerian context in terms of issues of religious leaning and issues of religious cleavages. For those up north, they think that assertion is unwarranted, that threat is unwarranted, because if you had opportunity of traveling to the northeast, for example, I just came back from Maiduguri last 3 weeks, where I did a lot of extensive field work. There's always this sentiment that majority of those who have been who are victims of the Boko Haram, I tend to believe in that argument, are largely Muslims. So for those who are occupying that geographic space in Nigeria, that kind of threat from Trump doesn't sit well with them. But if you also talk to those who are actually from the Middle Belt, then you also see that kind of assertion is even being welcomed as more or less a messianic. Important thing is for us to really understand that clearly raises a lot of questions in terms of Nigerian state, and in particular the government's capability to rein in all those who are actually contesting the monopoly of violence, and how that creates dangerous narratives, because it opens the flanks, like we say in the military, it opens the flanks for us as a sovereign country for external intervention, especially when we cannot really deal with the way and manner, the dynamics of violence, such that people can now take narratives around that. So in a sense, and if I must summarize, I think that the United States is also coming against the backdrop of tremendous influence that the evangelical mission that have a very strong hold in the Republican Party in the United States would have also presented on the table of Donald Trump, and Trump is also trying to leverage that as part and parcel of what he wants to achieve in terms of his foreign policy posture. But in Nigeria, I think also it's creating that fissure, along geographical lines. But I think that the Nigerian government is already doing a lot in terms of the posture I think they've taken in the last 1 week to be able to douse such tension.
All right, Prof, well said there. But you see, it raises questions again as regards religious extremism in Nigeria. We say it didn't start today, but it just keeps evolving from local, grievances to transitional movements, that now use digital platforms to spread various ideologies, in your research, basically. How has this radicalism, changed in recent years? And why do government responses still seem as if they're just a little behind?
Yes, and again, I think it is important to with the context of the concerns and the controversy becomes as made. Because you see, I'm sorry to use the word, but that is what comes to my mind. I think this country has a legendary history of ethno-religious violence, and that in itself is being seen from different perspectives. What we are seeing today did not really start today. Dating back in the 1980s, this country have had a very dangerous religious episode, particularly the Maitasine riot in 1980 to 1985, and of course after that, we have episodes of violent religious outbursts associated with issues of blasphemy, issues of even having this world riot in Nigeria, or things that even take place outside Nigeria, but then tend to actually instigate religious violence. But I think, having monitored this religion security landscape in Nigeria, I think we have now seen fundamental shift. Shift in terms of religious violence and religious extremism, not just being perpetrated at the individual level, but the extent to which we have now seen fundamental transformation and transmogrifications of groups that have just moved from mere fighting local grievances to the level where they've established transnational reach and they have the capability not only to launch attacks beyond the borders of Nigeria, particularly in the case of the Boko Haram and this splinter group, Islamic State, West African Province, but more importantly and more concerning, the fact also that these violent extremist group have also leaped up in terms of its technological adaptation to be able to use some of the digital media, social media platforms in order to actually radicalize individuals, dishing out propaganda messages and narratives that tend to cast them in that messianic view that they want to salvage their people from the clutches and bad governance in the context of Nigerian government. But I think it's something that really we need to look at, particularly the way and manner in which violent extremist organizations, and in this case I'm talking about Islamic State West African Province, have increasingly leveraged social media platform, Twitter, Telegram, to be able to propagate its ideology, to be able to actually demonstrate some of the battle space successes it has been able to do, particularly the kind of videos they make from attacks at military posts and civilians in order to radicalize individuals. So I think this is one of the DSS that is responsible to that kind of hidden surreptitious move of monitoring online systems to be able to take down some of those extremist content that has radicalization intent, or that has the potential also to serve as a basis for recruitment for those who are supporting or sympathetic of the cause of these Islamic groups. But more importantly, I think it's an area that we need to do more, both in terms of monitoring, but in terms of proactive response, to be able to deny these guys the oxygen they breathe through with these platforms.
All right, that takes us, 2 minutes, you're just going to tell us, because you've just recently started working on some other part of your research that has to do with drone wars. Tech is coming into it. We're seeing a new, that new frontier, the era of drone wars. From both northwest, northeast, the drones are every part of the security, conversation right now. The question is, how has our response as a military, in the military nation, in the nation's military rather, how has the response been? And then what exactly are we supposed to be doing to really respond and shift in tactics? Because it is time to rethink counterterrorism. That was your statement. So what do you really mean in that sense?
Yeah, again, you see, what I call the jihadist sphere. So the jihadist sphere is more or less the geographic, technological, and the cyber domain where terror groups try to operate. Jihadist sphere has changed and evolved tremendously in recent times. But if you look at technological adaptation, I think the proliferation and deployment of drone becomes the most prominent and the most transforming in terms of this battle space. Sometimes in 2018, we saw jihadi group, particularly the Boko Haram or Islamic State West African Province, try to use and utilize these drones for purposes of ISR, and by ISR I mean intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And when they do that, it serves them two purposes. First, it helps them in battle preparation, but more importantly, the pictures they also pick, they use it for purposes of propaganda. However, from 2022 and then 2023, we then saw a kind of technological adaptation and leap that talked about, using these drones for purposes of weaponization. That means you can now deploy drones that have weapons and use it for targeting. That in itself is a clear major milestone in terms of technological innovation and adaptation by these groups.
All right, Prof, let me hold you there for a moment. We're going to be taking a break, and when we come back, Prof is going to be taking us all the way down into the new tactics and what should be done, and then we continue this very important conversation. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back. This is The Beam, and we've been talking about security in its many phases: political, religious, environmental, and Professor Honor has been on standby. Prof, you're going to start again from just a bit of that chronology of the use of drones, because we were talking about the new tactics that's being used against the military and how the response should be right now. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so I'm talking about if we're actually going to calibrate the milestone. We saw them use it in 2018, especially for the purposes of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and also to support their propaganda posture and engagement. But we also then gradually began to saw that in 2022, 2023, for them to begin to use these drones for purposes of weaponization, that is putting some of improvised explosive devices and for targeting. But my worry, like I mentioned in recent past, my worry is the fact that there's every likelihood to suspect, if not to conclude, that these terror groups are increasingly also bringing in night vision capability in the way they are deploying these drones, and that is all going to fundamentally change or transmogrify the battle space, and that imposes a whole lot of challenges for our troops out there. So, given that application, given that deployment, I think that it is now time for us to overhaul our counter-terrorism strategy, do a whole lot in terms of first, improve our tech. When I mean tech, I'm talking about technical intelligence, particularly in the areas that enable us to pick signals. And in this regard, therefore, I think that more than ever before, Nigerian military and security institutions need to begin to design clear their digital warfare preparedness and plans that involve, procuring, do more trainings on how we can use counter-drone devices, for example, signal jamming devices, to counter the way and these groups are deploying it. More importantly, again, it's not just about the kinetic aspect, which is using the counter-drone measures. I think, again, we need to improve on interagency coordination and intelligence sharing to be able to begin to identify how do these guys pick these drones? Is it completely assembled on breakdown form, so that you know who is giving them access to this drone, so that you can actually damn that pool from where they get access. And like what we did in the military when I was there, in terms of training, there's always this tendency for us to bring in what we call scenario building exercises in the training of strategic leaders, even at some level, the operational leaders. I think that there's need for us to scale up, if I put it that way, the integration of scenario building exercises in terms of training, so that we can prepare the mind of field commanders, operational leaders, even strategic leaders to be in terms of trends, and more importantly, ensuring that countermeasures put it by training, so that they don't take us by surprise. I've mentioned it in the past. I don't think we are doing more in terms of strategic forecast, in terms of scenario building, because I fear very strongly that as these groups, fine-tune and finalize the capabilities in using these new technologies like drone, there's the potentials that they may try to use it to bridge, the tremendous gap created by geography, that these guys can actually sit one corner and use these drones to hit critical infrastructure, for example, maritime assets, ships, and stuff like that. And they can actually even begin to target something like our energy infrastructure when we're talking about electricity substations. Yeah. If it is their interest to put the whole of Southeast in blackout and then give them that battle edge advantage, then I have to foresee or predict very soon these guys can leverage this technological adaptability to begin to knock out this critical infrastructure that even support military operations. And the more we integrate scenario building and strategic forecasting in our military training and preparedness, including in doctrinal development, the more we have the chances of staying a step ahead of them to be able to blunt their usage of these technological tools and the devices.
Well, that's a lot said there, and I'm hoping that those who really should be watching are watching right now and doing what is needful. In going from there, how much do you think that, climate security is still a question when it comes to the battle we're facing with regards to terrorism? How much of that is still playing out as we speak?
Well, when you mention the question of climate change, it depends on who you are telling about climate change and its connection to security. I think it's even Donald Trump who mentioned that climate change is the biggest fraud of the 21st century. I'm not a Trumpian, but I think that from scholarship and from research, there is almost a clear nexus, between climate change and the dynamics of security. It might not be direct, but one of the things we have come to appreciate in terms of research and finding is that climate change is multiplier. It tends to affect some of those living conditions, environmental conditions that get deprivation, that forced migration, that also even make people a lot vulnerable. And I can mention this with experiences I've gathered from the south, from the northeast. I was in Maiduguri 3 weeks ago, precisely like I mentioned, and I had the opportunity of discussing with people who are in IDPs. And I'll just give example of what we saw. In the context of the major flood that took place last year in 2023 in Maiduguri, I'm sure you're aware of that. There is something I saw that was quite shocking. The major prison in Maiduguri, Boko Haram attempted to infiltrate that prison 3 times, from 2015 to 2023. Boko Haram attempted to infiltrate that prison to free some of its inmates. But do you know that what Boko Haram could not infiltrate, the major flood destroyed that prison and then created a whole lot of problems. So imagine if climate-induced flood can actually create unintended impact on strategic facilities such as prison, then you can begin to see the clear connection between climate change and security, because some of these prisoners that have left can also begin to compound our security challenges. The second point is the fact that climate change also exacerbates our living conditions. For example, where you have flood destroy farms, or where you have drought destroy farms, it contributes to what we call, productivity and crop failure. And when do not have access to legitimate livelihoods, that increases the ability to recruitment and radicalization by this group. Because I'm sure you know that the first principle of life is survival. So if you cannot survive through legitimate means, and there are prospects of surviving through criminality, then that plays out. And that is how the complex connection and nexus that does exist, between climate change and security. And in the context of Nigeria, scholars have also shown that as climate change makes some environment unlivable, people are forced to migrate. And there is actually a sense that which we can argue, almost rightly, correctly, and so, that because some of the places where we have some of our headers are becoming increasingly unproductive and unlivable for them, they are forced to migrate. And in the process of their migration, these headers themselves are also exposed to threats associated with cattle rustling. And again, even when they move to some host communities that are not welcome, or where we see crops being inadvertently destroyed by their heads, that in itself creates friction and tension. And where you have, death of traditional institutions, structures, and mechanisms, for resolving tensions and dispute. The tendency, therefore, is that this kind of dispute and tension will degenerate into violent conflict. And people argue, and I tend to actually subscribe to that, that climate change is also, leading to forced migration, including for the headers who are moving down south, and that has also compounded security challenges in the face of death or weakness of our traditional dispute resolution mechanism. So there is quite a very complex nexus between climate change and security. And I've actually increasingly and sustainedly so advocated for us to begin to integrate the climate change conflict peace nexus in the doctrinal training, in the doctrinal development of the Nigerian military, and even in the training as well, not just for the military, but also for security agents, because once you have a good grasp of this complex nexus, then you now know how you can react to the root causes, not to the symptoms and manifestation, in terms of defense and security management perspective.
All right, Prof, thank you very much for your depth and your perspective. There's so much more I wanted to ask you, but time will not permit us. Thank you for coming on the program today.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, that's the beam. As always, we're going to be leaving you with our top 5 videos of the week. I am Soonest Nathaniel, reminding you to stay curious, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep beaming your light where it matters the most. May this nation continue to rise and flourish. Bye for now.
This week we begin our countdown with a video of the U.S. President Donald Trump dishing out a threat with regards to claims that there is a deliberate attempt to eliminate Christians in Nigeria.
The Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians. The USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria. We're going to do things to Nigeria that Nigeria is not going to be happy about.
In 4th place, we see Nigerian publisher and businessman Dele Momodu reacting to Trump's military threats, saying Nigeria is a failed state.
Look at the number of people who have died in Borno, the people who have died in Niger. I hear even Kwara, next door to Oyo State, is no longer safe. And yet nothing has happened.
Still on Trump's threat, we have in third place a clip in which Martin Soloja, a former editor-in-chief at The Guardian, asserts that those who do not like Nigeria are denying the killing of Christians.
And Mr. President should summon up courage, to have the political will to discern this fact that there are some people who do not want these crises to head. I call them, what others have called them, crisis merchants.
In second place, the Trump issue lingers, even as Dele Farotimi, lawyer and author, argues that it takes a bully like Trump to get Nigerian leaders to do what is right.
So if that is what it took to awaken somebody who can get the attention of the Nigerian government to focus on the evil that is happening in Nigeria, I am happy.
And coming tops on our list this week, the Minister of the FCT, Mr. Nyesom Wike, reacts to Trump's claim of Christians being killed in Nigeria.
It's unfortunate. All I tell people is that nobody will be happy for the death of anybody, whether a Christian or a Muslim. No right-thinking person, no leader.
That's it on our countdown today. Join us next week for more.